July 27, 1656, Amsterdam. A 23-year-old man walks out of the Portuguese synagogue on the St. Antony's Braestraat and into the city his grandparents had chosen for refuge. His name was Baruch Spinoza, and he had just been excommunicated. The formal document, the Harem, condemned his evil acts, dictating absolute isolation. It forbade his family from speaking to him or reading his work. To this day, that ban has never been formally lifted. But Amsterdam was the most tolerant city in the world. How does this happen there? That is the question this entire conversation is about. The city that offered unparalleled freedom to fleeing minorities simultaneously exiled its greatest freethinker into absolute isolation. The 1579 Union of Utrecht enshrined freedom of conscience in law. Every person remained free in their religion.
The Republic guaranteed this right while the Spanish Inquisition operated, and while France and England executed Catholics and Protestants. Looking at this map of 17th-century European migration routes, you see a constant flow into the Republic. Sephardic Jews expelled from the Iberian Peninsula, French Huguenots fleeing state violence, and English Pilgrim Fathers all sought and found refuge in Amsterdam and Leiden. This deliberate state policy rested on a pragmatic calculation. The merchant class understood that global maritime trade required absolute trust, and trust required strict domestic stability. Early Dutch tolerance relied entirely on a highly successful calculated system of statecraft designed to secure economic dominance. By 1621, the Dutch Republic's maritime trade network aggressively expanded into the lucrative waters of Asia. That year, VOC Governor-General Jan Pieterszoon Koen calculated that the indigenous population of the Banda Islands was an obstacle to a global monopoly on nutmeg. He ordered the massacre of virtually the entire population. Out of 15,000 people, fewer than 1,000 survived. And this was approved in Amsterdam by the same people? It was official company policy. The same merchant class funding the Republic's tolerant institutions signed off on the eradication. Simultaneously, the Dutch Republic transported an estimated 600,000 enslaved Africans across the Atlantic through the Dutch West India Company, structurally relying on human exploitation to maintain its global empire. The structural logic of the era demanded that tolerance remain strictly conditional. At home, differing beliefs were protected as long as they caused no scandal for the state. Abroad, human life was expendable if it interfered with the flow of trade. This bar chart comparing Jewish mortality rates under Nazi occupation reveals the ultimate failure of the system. While the European average for occupied countries was roughly 40%, 75% of Dutch Jews were murdered. Mark. Host 2. How is that possible in the most tolerant country in Europe? Host 1. The Netherlands possessed a meticulous civil registry. The occupying forces used these records, combined with the flat geography that offered almost nowhere to hide, and the compliance of local bureaucracy to systematically locate Jewish families. Anne Frank and her family hid for 761 days before they were betrayed by someone within the country. Nobody knows who. Mark. Yet, thousands of citizens hid Jewish families at enormous personal risk. In February 1941, Amsterdam workers went on strike to halt the deportations, the only mass public protest against anti-Jewish measures anywhere in occupied Europe. The nation under occupation contained both devastating bureaucratic complicity and extraordinary acts of physical resistance. Following the war, the country rebuilt its identity. By the 1960s, Amsterdam operated under Gedobeleid, a deliberate policy of looking away from what could not be eliminated. Police and civil authorities tolerated freethinkers and subcultures to reduce social harm. In 2001, the Netherlands secured a global milestone by legalizing same-sex marriage. During this economic recovery, guest workers arrived from Morocco and Turkey. The state welcomed their labor, but left a crucial question unanswered. Were they welcomed as future citizens or strictly as temporary workers? For 5 decades, the Netherlands came closer to its own mythological ideal of pure tolerance than at any other point in its history. The post-war consensus fractured on May 6, 2002. Pim Fortuyn, a politician campaigning to halt immigration, was shot dead outside a radio studio. It was the first political assassination in the country in centuries. 2 years later, filmmaker Theo van Gogh was murdered on an Amsterdam street. 2 decades after that, in November 2024,
Violent riots erupted around an Ajax versus Maccabi Tel Aviv football match, with Israeli fans attacked in the city center. The street violence prompted King Willem-Alexander to issue a stark public warning, stating that history teaches how intimidation escalates when left unchecked. Is this the same city that sheltered the Pilgrims and Spinoza? Following these events, Geert Wilders' Freedom Party secured major political influence. By late 2025, anti-immigration protests in Amsterdam resulted in 29 arrests, and the Dutch coalition government collapsed entirely over immigration policy. Current demographic data reflects this friction. Half of Dutch Muslims report facing discrimination, a rate significantly higher than the rest of the European Union. The country that wrote the book on tolerance is currently tearing pages out of it, which brings us back to Baruch Spinoza. His community forced him into absolute isolation out of deep-seated fear that his ideas would provoke their hosts, not out of hatred. Tolerance breaks down through exact mechanisms like this. It rarely collapses in a single dramatic moment. It fractures through a series of small, isolated, reasonably sounding decisions to exclude. Tolerance was never an inherited Dutch character trait. It was always an active, deliberate choice. Because it is a choice, it can be examined, defended, and renewed. Or they can be unmade. That is what the Dutch taught the world. That is what the Dutch are still trying to teach themselves.